Hi, folks. Here today with kind of our first real look at some of the content in our AP Language and Composition course. Before we get started, I really want you to stop and make sure you have read these two documents that I've posted up on my website and on Google Classroom. Read the course overview, understand that, and then I really want you to read and start knowing in and out what these critical concepts are that we're going to talk about for the rest of the year. Obviously, we'll bring them up, but in this first attempt, I want you to take some ownership and take a look at what we're going to be asking you to do both in reading and in writing. And also, before we really get started, after reading those critical concepts, I want you to think about the why of this class. Why do you think this class in particular might be really important for you as an academic, as a student, as a citizen in this world? And the reason that I kind of come up with is once we understand the rules of language and how it's being used, we are really empowered to take initiative and be a participant in conversations that are going on in America and the world today. Academic conversations, social conversations, and also conversations that have been happening throughout time, right? There are themes and ideas that have started decades or centuries ago that still come up. And to be able to understand them and the history behind these ideas really starts to give students a voice and understand how do I fit into this and how do other people kind of influence me or persuade or manipulate me as well. So this first unit that we're going to talk about is all going to be about the author and the relationship they have with an audience, sort of the context in which these two elements of art, the creator and the observer, how they work together, how they influence one another. So our first task and objective is going to be to analyze the rhetorical choices a writer makes. And right away, I'm kind of struck by this word rhetoric. It's maybe a word you're not super familiar with. I wasn't familiar with it until I got into college. But what rhetoric actually is the art of persuasive or effective language. So if someone has or is using particularly effective rhetoric, that means they're really getting their point across. They're using language well. It's basically kind of the power of words and how you can put these together to really make someone feel or think something. And within that, we also have to talk about the rhetorical situation. So if this author or writer is creating something, what are the circumstances in which this piece of art or this piece of writing or this speech is being put out there? So one of the first skills that we'll take a look at is being able to identify and describe the components of that rhetorical situation. And it looks kind of like this. So there's 6 elements of a basic rhetorical situation. The exigence, which is kind of like the catalyst, what led this writer to create whatever they did. Purpose is why that speaker or that writer is conveying a message. And then the message is what the writer wants the audience to know. The audience is going to be to whomever the writer is speaking. So is this, tweeted out to the world? Is this a public address given by the president? Is this a speech given at a convention or poetry read at a coffee shop? Like, what's the audience going on here? And the context, then this one's pretty big. Context is the circumstances around which this piece of art was created. So think about the time, the place, the current events and historical events, all leading up to this one thing being written or drawn or painted. And then lastly, we have to take a look at the writer themselves. Who are they? What is their background? What is their perspective or their schema in the world that led them to create this thing? Additionally, so I'd say this is these 6 elements are going to be the main way we're going to take a look at rhetorical situation, but there are a few others that I want to make you aware of. One of this is the rhetorical triangle, and it's just the relationship between the audience, the speaker, and then the reason why this piece of art is being created, and their relationship. And obviously, this is all still within a context of a state or a nation or a country or a movement as well. Additionally, there's a common mnemonic called soapstone, which gets us to the same ideas. It's the same way of looking at it, just different terms. So the subject is kind of like the the context. The occasion would be the exigence, what led the person to write something. Who are they writing it to? Why are they writing it? Who's the writer? And then lastly, this one also adds tone. So it's the feeling of the piece, and that can kind of help us get to the rhetorical situation. Is it sad? Is it hopeful? Is it happy? So I've talked for a little bit. So I want you to press pause on this video right now and do a little brain dump in your notes. Get your pen and paper out and actually just try and write down without looking at your notes. What do you remember about the critical concepts? Can you name all 4? What is rhetoric in the rhetorical situation? And what are the 6 elements of the rhetorical situation? See if you can remember and define those. Okay. So the second thing we're going to talk about today is how do we start analyzing this? This is a lot to look at. And so we're going to look at rhetorical reading techniques. And what rhetorical reading refers to is reading not just for comprehension, but for actually understanding how meaning is created within a text. So how does this author make this feel sad or happy or scary? Or how do they really make this argument convincing or powerful for the time? So comprehension is no longer the bar. That's going to be kind of the foundation, right? AP language courses are college level courses. So fundamentally, we've got to understand, okay, what's going on in this text? And then we just have to keep going up and up and up to figure out, okay, how is meaning being created in this text? What moves is the author making? And it takes a lot of practice, but I have full faith that we'll be able to do it over the course of the semester and the year. So we're going to look at a lot of different strategies to help us with this idea of rhetorical reading. But one of them is taking a look at 3 different ways that we can read a text. So the first time you take a look at a text or a painting or whatever it is, take a look at what is literally there. That is the explicit reading. Those are the words that are on the page. That's what you see when you look at a painting or a photograph. What is physically, literally there. And make observations about that. Second time you go through it, you're going to look for the implicit observations. So what's going on underneath the surface between those lines of text that are actually there? Or what feeling does this evoke? What are maybe some of the meanings of the symbols that I physically see, but obviously their meaning isn't necessarily fully explained within the explicit nature of the text? What are the connotations of some of the words? Then lastly, as you're making explicit and implicit observations, you get to be sort of an active observational participant throughout this entire process. The idea is you are engaging with the text, and by looking at the 2 points of data, explicit observations, implicit observations, you are also having reactions. And in those reactions, you are figuring out like, oh yeah, I had a reaction here. So that means the writer was doing something that made me feel this way or think this thing. What was it? Helps us zero in on important passages of a text. So we're going to practice this together really quick. So I've got a short poem. It's a 4-line poem, one of my favorites, by Margaret Atwood. So we're going to look at this poem explicitly, implicitly, and then see what kind of commentary it gave to us. So, you fit into me is the first line of the poem. So explicitly, what am I seeing? I'm seeing 2 people, you and me, and we're fitting together. That's physically what's there. Like a hook into an eye, a fish hook, an open eye. So right there, obviously that poem takes a pretty serious twist in the last 2 lines. So if we're going to look at this in 3 ways, I might create a little chart like this as I'm reading and just keep note of the things that explicitly are there. You, me, fish hook, and eyeball. And when I look at the you and me, the implied thing is a relationship. If you're fitting into me, I'm guessing that this is maybe a romantic relationship or it could be a friendly relationship. We don't know, but it automatically makes me kind of ask that question, like what's going on between these 2 people, or what has gone on between these 2 people. Explicitly, if I see that fish hook, I can start to imply a lot of things as well, like pain and persistence. If you get stuck with a fish hook it's hard to get out and it's painful to get out. So there's this element of damage and entrapment, and maybe even tricking someone. Because if I'm fishing, it's not like that fish knows what I'm doing. I'm luring them into this situation, this parasitic hunter prey situation. And then the last like explicit observation that I have is that of an eyeball, which gives me this really visceral feeling. When I think of an eyeball, I think of vision, but also of fragility and vulnerability. Because like, I don't know, I don't watch MMA, but I think I know one of the rules is you can't hit someone in the eye. That's like you can do everything else, but the eyeballs are a no-go. So when you talk about damage to an eye, that's like, it's almost taboo. Like, you don't do that. So the impediment of vision and the destruction of the senses start to really kind of tell me how deeply flawed this relationship is and or was. So by looking at those, I can kind of go back and take a look at our rhetorical situation here, and I can start to make some assumptions. I could take a good guess at like, okay, what inspired the author to write this? What were they trying to say, or why were they trying to say it, and what were they trying to say? Who were they writing it to? When were they writing it, and who is this person? I'm betting I could check off about 4 or 5 of those just by taking a look at my explicit observations, my implicit observations, and the commentary that I came up with. So lastly, just as a recap, what are the big takeaways? Number one, you need to know these 6 steps to analyzing the rhetorical situation: exigence, purpose, message, audience, context, and who the writer is. And lastly, we're going to start practicing this idea of rhetorical reading, where we're not just reading for meaning, but we're starting to take a deeper look at how and why a text is created the way it is. All right. Good luck with the assignment, folks. Holler if you have questions.